Hello, everybody. I'm Dian Griesel. This is the Silver Disobedience podcast, and I have a really interesting guest today. His name is Anthony Celano. He's a retired detective and squad commander at the New York City Police Department, who also left that career, but before he left, he handled organized crime divisions. He handled narcotics, plenty of murders and other crimes before he started his own security business. Ultimately, he exited that business and started writing crime fiction. And he is a really good crime fiction writer. He's got a whole boatload of books to his name now. And we're going to talk about those. And we're going to talk about going from one career to another, what it feels like to launch a book, those nerves you get. Like, are people going to still think my characters are good? My storytelling is, a spot on. So please say hello to Anthony Celano.
Hello, Diane.
It is so much fun to have you back. I've interviewed you a couple of times. I socialized with you upon occasion, and I just love your transitions through life and how they have unfolded into this series of books.
Yeah.
So, where do we begin today? I have so many thoughts and questions. I want to ask first, let's give everyone a little color about your background on the police department so people can understand your experience that you can then bring to your characters in your book, which I think is a huge asset. You have so many writers that never did something, but they write about it. They research it, but they didn't do it.
Yeah.
You come from a very different skill set.
Yeah, I think my probably the big advantage that I had looking back on it, now I could say it. At the time, I didn't see it as an advantage, but now
Tough job.
Well, no, I'm going even before the police department.
Oh.
Now I look at it back, and thanks to the exposure that I had, it makes it easy for me to develop characters. Now, I lived in 3 neighborhoods, growing up. I went to 3 grammar schools.
3 grammar schools?
Yeah.
That's a lot of moving for a little kid.
Yeah, we moved, yeah. We kept moving. And every experience was a little different because in those days, everything was along ethnic lines. So my first neighborhood was predominantly Black. There were, Hispanics and a dwindling number of Caucasians that lived in that neighborhood. The second one was strictly Italian. The second, we lasted about a year there. And then,
Those Italians are tough.
Yeah. I got along with them.
And you are one.
I'm one, yeah, I am. But anyway, then the third one was Park Slope, which I ended up, and I still live in Park Slope. So there were no play dates or anything like that. So you had to go out and make friends, and you had to deal with these ethnicities, and you had to know how to cope. And those were personalities. Some were very domineering people, some were bullies, some weren't bullies, some were weak. We had a whole smorgasbord of people to draw from in terms of creativity. When I went on to the police department, I worked in a lot of different places. I mean, I worked in Manhattan on the Lower East Side. I started out and I worked in South Brooklyn, the Red Hook section, and then I went into the narcotics division.
You had pretty tough neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, in Brooklyn
considering
North,
the time
I was
frame,
in the narcotics, and then from there I went to the Drug Enforcement Task Force, which is up here on 50-something Street. And then I went to the 5th Precinct Detective Squad in Chinatown in Little Italy, and then from there to Queens DA's office, and then, then I made sergeant, and then I went back to Brooklyn North, and then to Brooklyn South. So I went to all these different neighborhoods, and again, that's a lot of people you come across.
Not just neighborhoods, different precincts.
Yeah, well, that's right. Every precinct has a certain composition, and you get to deal with the people, who reside there, and you got to kind of understand their ways.
Yeah.
For argument's sake, in Chinatown, if you speak to somebody down there and they don't look you in the eye, that's not anything to be offended about. Sometimes that's a cultural thing,
Mm-hmm.
and now you wouldn't know that unless you were down there exposed to that. So there are certain things that you pick up, and you learn what to say, what not to say,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of can read people pretty well, and then the people you worked with. Don't forget that there were 30,000 cops or 25,000 cops. There's a lot of people. And there was plenty to draw from. And that's not just on a professional level. There's also on a social level.
Right.
Because you didn't just work with these folks, you socialized with them. And then there were other dynamics as the years progressed for me. I mean, when I was in a police department, when I started, it was 95% male Caucasians.
Mm-hmm.
And it changed. And we had more and more female police officers. That was another dynamic. And then we had more and more minority police officers. That's another dynamic. So everything was sort of an evolution.
Uh-huh.
And in terms of creative writing, you had plenty to draw from. I had plenty to draw from.
How do you describe your personality? Do you think you're an observer? What's your skill set that you applied?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's a skill set, but I had a certain survival ability in me.
That's a skill.
Yeah, and that was from living in different neighborhoods,
right?
And I knew don't talk too much until you get the lay of the land. Mm-hmm. And I learned, to be quiet, not to be, when to speak up, when not to, when to draw that line in the sand, and then you got to understand to reach that point. You get cuffed around a little bit because nobody's teaching you this. You're going to learn a lot of hard lessons. But once those lessons are learned, that's all fodder for these books. I mean, these are all things that you could use. These are all experiences, some harrowing, some not,
And you do create some really interesting characters. You have Von Hess, you have Sergeant Markey, you have Fishnet. You've got... those are some of your recurring ones. And then you bring in all this cast of characters of the criminals. You really build out your characters in interesting ways. I feel like Fishnet, every time he was on the scene, I could feel my back get a little stiff, like, what might this guy do next?
Yeah. Well, as you follow Fishnet, I think Fishnet appeared in 4 or 5 of the books.
Yeah.
Then he died off,
Mm-hmm.
But he evolved.
Yeah.
He became worse and worse and worse. Markey himself became, I don't know if it was worse and worse and worse, but you could see the dark side of him.
With the relationship with his girlfriend who dies at one point.
Yeah, the more you got to know him, the more you realize that he was no altar boy. Uh-huh. So, and that's with all the characters. I try to approach it, the good and the bad side of people. Because the person who's gay and happy in the evening is could be a totally different person in the morning.
Right. That is something very interesting you draw out. You said to me one time, I think, something to the effect of not everybody's all good and not everybody's all bad.
Well, that's right. That's right. And I think that's something I got from my mother. Uh-huh. Because my mother wasn't one to... First of all, my father wouldn't say anything. He was very tight-lipped about most things. Mm-hmm. But my mother was the type that she would never prejudge. Mm-hmm. She'd get the facts, make a decision, and she would base, her feelings on her gut, on what she felt. And because somebody did something wrong, she wouldn't dismiss that person as a total washout, somebody to dismiss. She would she'd look beyond the surface. People do things for a reason, and sometimes they're good reasons. Sometimes they're not very good reasons. Mm-hmm. But there is a reason why they do what they do. It's not to make excuses for people,
right?
But there's nothing wrong with understanding that,
right?
And I tell you the truth, I got many a confession with that attitude out of people, because I never criticized them for what they did. Mm-hmm. No, regardless how heinous the crime was. Mm-hmm. I never would say anything nasty in that regard as to what they had done. Right. I really approached it as almost understanding. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to judge you.
Right.
I'm here to arrest you.
Right. And, right. I'm not the judge and the jury. That's
right. You did what you did. You did what you did for a reason. And to you, it made sense, and maybe it would have made sense to me. I don't know. I'm not you. That approach got them to open up to me, and then they would implicate themselves, which was to the benefit of the prosecution ultimately.
Huh. That is so interesting.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. It's also one of the reasons I think I'd have a very hard time. I've been called for jury duty a lot, but never had to sit on a jury.
Right.
I always think I would be so, almost no matter what the crime, well, maybe not any crime, but I always see those different sides of what makes somebody act in that moment.
Yeah, well, that makes you objective.
Yeah.
And you're probably a good person to sit on a jury because you'll look at it from, all sides.
Don't say that too loud, okay? I don't want another jury notice. Okay, so you're developing these characters. Are they based on any one person you know? Is it an amalgamation you put together?
Yeah, the combination of a bunch of different people, traits of different people that I've come across. Don't forget, if I create a character and he does something heroic and good, then I got to fish around for somebody who's done something that's not so heroic or great, and kind of mark him up a little bit to show his darker side. He has to have some bad habits maybe, or something to make him human. Because there's nobody perfect.
Right.
Matter of fact, that sounds terrible, but I never trusted anybody who smiled too much.
Uh-oh.
To me, that was the greatest tip-off of doom and disaster that would be approaching. A guy smiles too much at me, and to me, it's not normal to smile too much. To me,
that's so funny. The other day, I was on set with a photographer, and they said, I'm really having a hard time getting that straight face picture from you because even your eyes are twinkling. I'm like, I just can't take this seriously enough that I can't laugh about it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of tricksters, use that smile to take advantage, or to lure you into a situation where they could rob you or take advantage of you. And that's from my earliest age, from the Bedford-Stuyvesant, where I grew up.
Well, I think there's a lot to that. I always use the expression, I never got screwed by somebody I didn't really like first.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty universal because if you didn't like someone for some reason or another, you wouldn't let them get that close in the first place.
That's right. And that's right. No, you
so
sit back and you say,
tough having that as a built-in.
Well, it's a radar. I also, you put your arm around me, why? You're just smiling at me, why? What have I done for you that you're doing this for me? There's got to be a reason behind. There's got to be a motive behind that.
That's very interesting because you're one of the best networkers I think I've ever met.
I do all right with networking, God's honest truth, and I'm not trying to boast or anything.
You do a real good job. You're always thinking of who to connect with who.
Yeah, because I approach it where I'm not looking to get anything out of it. I do it because I like somebody and I want to help them. So I do it. If I don't like them, I don't do it. But there's no self-gain. I would be the last guy to ask you for a favor. I just don't do that.
Well, feel free to move me to the top of the list anytime you want. The favor list.
Well, no. Well, you know me. I haven't. I don't. I'm not one to impose on people. But
I'm curious. Because you are such a good networker, because you've built such a network from the police, from your neighborhood, from the police force, to having your own security company, to all the things you've done throughout your life, the charities you've got involved with, everything. Yeah. Do you have people say, Anthony, Tony, is that me in that section of your book?
No.
No?
Matter of fact, Fishnet is one of the worst characters I've probably ever developed.
Yeah.
And the guy who was most like Fishnet that I knew didn't have a clue that it was him. that a lot of it had to do was based on him.
That's funny.
He never realized it. And I never told him.
Do you have a favorite character that you've developed?
No. What happens is, after a while you do. I'm just finishing my 8th book on this, and after a while you forget who's who. You forget which character was in which book. But I don't know. My favorites is basically Markey and Von Hess,
Mhm.
because they're really the Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson,
Yeah.
that appear in every book, and they go through their travels
Yeah.
and they come across people, bosses and superiors, and with their nuances, very much like some of the experiences I had, with some of them, and it sort of makes it credible.
Mhm.
It sort of makes it credible.
That's one of the things I really like. One of our interviews was about character development because
Right.
I think you do such a good job about that. When I'm reading, and I read a lot of books, you do feel like you know your characters.
Yeah, well, that was always my goal.
Which that's a big skill.
Yeah. That was always my goal. I wanted the reader to understand the character, how he thought, and to visualize him.
Mm-hmm.
And even sometimes a slight physical description.
Yeah.
Just so they could envision the person, because somewhere in their life they probably ran across somebody just like that character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then they could relate to it and understand it, and also understand the actions, the steps that they take.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily may have to agree with the steps that they take, but they'll understand them.
What inspired you to sit down and write your first book?
Well, after I closed the company, I had that company for 17 years. I was home doing nothing. I said, I have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly wasn't going to go to work for somebody at this point. And I just said, maybe I'll try writing a book. And I
Had you ever thought of writing before? I mean,
Well,
I'm
actually,
sure you had to write a lot of police reports, but
Yeah, well, I did a lot of writing, professionally. Like for the ASIS is a professional society for security people, and I wrote a few articles for that magazine, and they actually published me in their best practices book.
impressive.
On one of the things. Yeah, well, I had a training program in my company, and I think I spoke on that, and that made it into their book, their best practices book. And I wrote for I wrote for the Daily News, and I wrote, an article in there, and different places. So I always got a notion once in a while to write something. I did it.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as writing a book, I never, envisioned that I would be doing that earlier on. But then after I retired, I said, I got the time. Let me try one. And I did, and I got the first one, and then the second one, and then the third one. After it gets easier, actually, because the process is easier. You understand the process easier.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I did it. I mean, that's how I got started. I was very lucky with the first book, to be honest with you. I happened to hear from an old client who called me up, and he had something to discuss. We discussed it, and I was retired at this point. He said, so what are you doing? So I said, well, I'm writing this book. And he says, well, this may be fortuitous because I left the old job that he had. And he says, now I'm the president of the CEO of a publishing house. So I said, well, that is fortuitous.
Yes.
But that wasn't a rubber stamp either. I mean, he
had to like this.
He opened up the door, but there was a panel, that.
Mm-hmm.
And the more people that read it on that panel, that's what got me through. They decided to go with it.
How did let's stick with that first book a minute. How did it evolve? Did you know the beginning to the end?
Yeah, the first book, I had a very good idea of the beginning and the end.
You did.
I did, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
what about the middle?
Well, that flowed.
It flowed
that
to the beginning.
flowed.
To the end.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Once I painted myself into a corner in one chapter, I figured a way out on the second chapter. So there was
Did you
a
use
road.
a lot of sticky notes and different
no,
things to try to keep track?
No, just out of my head and into the.
Really?
Yeah. The only thing I would write down to so as a quick reference were names, so I didn't trip over the names.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, no, it went pretty smooth. And the second one the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, then I would really have to say I got more creative. I had to do a little more thinking on it. And I took experiences that I had. Like the third book I had, it was called, I think it was the third one. It was called The Case of the One-Eared Wolf.
Yeah.
Now that book, the One-Eared Wolf, by the way, was a ring with the ear, and somebody gave me this ring with an ear, an ear sawed off of this one-eared wolf. But
it was an actual ring you had.
well, somebody made it up for me and gave it to me. But the book itself, I was in the National Guard, and it was in an armory in Park Slope, and they had a place called the Deep Six, which was down a couple of sub-basements down there. And in that armory, they had tunnels that ran from 8th Avenue in Park Slope underground into Prospect Park. It was an escape route, and it was sealed up. But back in the day, that armory had a shooting range. It had a bowling alley. It had a horse stable. There was a lot down there.
This was all underground?
All underground. We never went down there because it was spooky.
Yeah.
Rats and whatever else was down there. We never went down there. I mean, we went down there, but I never hung out down there.
Right.
It was just a place eerie. And I thought about that, and I decided to do a story where these two thugs were going to get drafted, and it was a time of the Vietnam War, and they didn't want to be drafted. So to get out of the draft, they joined the National Guard. And now in those days, you had to know somebody to get into the National Guard. But anyway, they got into the National Guard, and they went away, and they came back. And then when they came back, they had to do these drills in the armory. And this required a certain amount of discipline. You had to be there 5 o'clock in the morning. You had to be clean-shaven. You had to be, spit and polish and all of that. And they weren't really disciplined guys for this. So they had this animosity for a top sergeant. And one thing led to another. Everybody was out on maneuvers. They were left behind at the armory with this top sergeant. And they decided to take him down a basement into the Deep Six and kill him. And they killed him. And then they opened up the wall that had been bricked up. They stuck him in there, and they got some cement, and they re-cemented it because nobody ever went down there. Re-bricked them in, and that was the story of the book. And then the ring comes in.
And this was
later.
fiction writing.
This is fiction
writing. You just
writing.
invented this from your
I
imagination.
did. Yeah, and the ring, he had a ring on his finger, and that comes into play in the book. That's where the one-eared wolf comes in, and it was a history with that ring. And but that's how that one developed. But it was based on an experience of being in that armory.
Right.
And then the other books, what I do, I try to pick a crime. And maybe it's bigamy, and then I'll build a story around bigamy.
Yeah.
And I did that one with the case of Too Many Wives.
Yes, that was a good book.
Yeah. And then the one, I'm trying to think of the other one. Oh, the case of the Hunted Woman. I said, I created enough evil men, let me create an evil woman, which you have to be a little careful with that. You don't want to anger anybody. So I created an evil woman, and and she's as bad as any of the men, male characters that I created. And it was her story,
Right.
And that was the case of the Hunted Woman. She sort of put herself in a position that everybody was after her. And then the diary was the last one,
Yes.
the case of the Deadly Diary.
Yep.
Which I don't know if you read that one, but that one you'd probably like.
That's next on my reading list.
Yeah, I think
because I
you'll
have
like
it sitting on my desk, and I said, "Shoot, I have Anthony coming in, and I didn't even read this book and review it yet."
Yeah. Well, that one is interesting because it's sort of from a woman's perspective. She's she's hurt romantically by men. She's one of these people who just can't seem to solidify a relationship. A wholesome relationship, and she gets depressed, and she kills herself. After a string of lovers, she kills herself. Her father finds this diary, and there's a story with the father too. She doesn't even know the guy is her father, but there's a whole history with that. But he happens to see the diary, and he reads it, and he knows somebody has to pay, and he just doesn't know which one of these guys, put her over. So he decides he's going to get even with all of them.
Oh,
And he's going to kill them all. But he's not a killer. So he's not a soft guy, but he's also not a killer. He's a business owner. So he has to recruit an element to help him perform these executions, and that's what the whole story is about. And that's.
Are you working on a new one now?
Yeah, I'm just finishing up this new one now. It's called The Case of the Lost Soul. That's SOLE, like a shoe sole.
Oh,
It's about a family-owned business, and it's a treachery. And actually, I was inspired by this from Lenny, our friend Lenny, with his family-owned business. And I said, what, maybe I could create something along those, like a family line, owned business line. And this one leads to greed and murder,
Oh, that's a good topic.
Yeah.
If you look
Yeah,
at
amongst
secession, what's
amongst
going
the
on with
relatives,
LVMH right now, and they're wondering
Yeah.
who's going to succeed. That's
yeah.
a timely topic.
And this has an international element because the guy who one of the characters was a shoemaker, and he built an empire because he went to Italy to go to a wedding. And there was a shoemaker over there who was a genius, but he was a working man. He didn't own a business or anything, and he come up with a shoe that helped deal with neuropathy, which made them all a fortune. He brought the guy over to this country, and they put up a factory. It became a whole big thing. He got into real estate. He created an empire for himself, and that's where the treachery begins. Because now he's got other people involved in his business, and his wife passes away. He marries another woman who's after him for his money. It gets ugly. Then it's
Okay.
ugly.
Well, I've got one backwards I have to go so I can be ready for the next one.
That one will come out in the new year.
How long does it take you to write a book on average?
Well, I pace it one a year.
One a year.
I do one a year. Yeah.
And what does your writing schedule look like?
Well, I get up every morning.
Well, that's good.
And I do it every morning. Yeah, that's right.
I'm glad you get up every morning.
But I don't do it. I don't do it for hours and hours and hours. I do a couple hours, then do whatever I do in the daytime. Watch Perry Mason.
So it's kind of like a discipline. Watch Perry Mason.
And Wagon Train and Gunsmoke. And when I'm done watching that, maybe I'll go up. I'll do another hour.
So you'd say you're pretty disciplined with the writing.
Oh, yeah, I am. And then once I get it down on paper, then I go back and then I fine-tune it. And again, I fine-tune chapter by chapter. You make your changes. And by the time it's done, it's around that year point, and it'll be done, and I gear it for 200 pages. And I gear it for 100,000 words. That generally roughly translates to 350 pages or something in that ballpark. And so those are my parameters, and I make it fit. If it doesn't fit, I take something out, or I add something. But I try to stick to those, those parameters.
Talking about making it fit
into
how do you
a book.
define the difference between writing and the editing process?
Well, again, I just go by the words and the pages, and I make it fit.
Do you ever have to move what you had in chapter 7 to chapter 2? Or...
I've done that. Yeah. Not a lot, but I have done that. Sometimes the sequence, as you're thinking it out, don't forget, I'm going from my head onto the page.
Right.
So sometimes the sequence of thoughts may not be exact because you're making this stuff up. It's not like you're following an alphabet, A, B, C, D. And when I go through for near the end, then I say, okay, maybe this chapter is better up. At the beginning, it's like maybe this paragraph belongs here. You move a paragraph here or there.
Yeah.
But ultimately, sometimes you move the chapter from here or there, depending upon how those characters may change. Because the characters do change as you develop them. Every time you look at it, you may make a little bit of a tweaking with a character.
When you're out to dinner with Anna, do you have your notepad right next to you in case some idea pops into your head?
No, I have to tell you that. You know what, that happens, but not at dinner. It happens in Atlantic City. Oh. I go once a month to Atlantic City. So, I'm there a couple of nights, and if you're gambling all day, you say, your mind is, and I'll sleep, and I'll wake up, and I'll be up in the 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and there's no writing to do, but I'll have an idea. And then I'll start,
scribbling.
I'll get up and I'll get a pad and I'll start writing notes. That happens to me. That happens quite often, actually, in Atlantic City. And I'll be able to outline a story. Yeah. In that period on a piece of paper.
I could believe it because it's funny how creativity changes based on your environment. Once you change something up, like your mind just does this reboot or refresh. And
well, there's also people down there.
Yeah. I bet.
I'll never forget. I was playing on a machine, a poker machine, and there was a woman standing over me. She must have been about 80 or 85 years old. She wanted the seat I was in. I guess that was her machine. She was standing over my shoulder. And I don't like people standing over my shoulder, particularly when I'm losing money. But I got up, I gave her the seat, But that was a character.
Right.
That's a character trait.
The persistence that she wasn't moving. You were.
That'll find a place somewhere in one of these books. I'm not quite sure where, but it'll come. It'll come out.
What does it feel like when you put out your next book? Are you nervous?
No more. No, but I was at the beginning.
Yeah.
There was always a concern at the beginning that it's not going to be good. Mm-hmm. Or it won't be enjoyable to people. God forbid it could be offensive to somebody. Mm-hmm. And that was always my concern, because you do this, at least I do this, not to, I don't want to offend anyone. That's not to offend anybody. If anything, I want to give people pleasure in reading this.
Right.
And there's a big reward in that, which far exceeds any financial reward. Mm-hmm. But it did, it was a concern at the beginning, because I wasn't sure, whether people, how it would be received.
Right.
And, there was also a generational factor involved in writing, because the older you get, there are terms, at least for me, that I use that are really, out of style. I mean, it's like me talking about lumbago. People wouldn't even know what lumbago is
right.
today. So there are certain phrases or words that you may use that people may perceive to be offensive, which was never offensive, but right. Now it may be perceived as offensive.
That's an interesting thing to think about.
I have to be very careful for that. I wasn't as careful with that at the beginning. That had to be pointed out to me. And it's okay. That's something I got to look for. And you graduate, you learn. You improve.
But it is also interesting to explore, because if a book took place in 1776 versus 1865 versus 1961 or 63 versus 1967 versus 2000, I mean, those are all pivotal years in history.
That's right.
And there were things that were said and done.
That's right.
Right down to ye old.
Yeah,
if you wrote ye old today.
That's
but
true.
If it was in a book about that time period, you'd say it belonged there. And if it wasn't there, if you said yup, you'd say, who said yup in 1776?
That's true. That's true. But I found out, to avoid that pitfall, I avoid
just safer.
that. I try to stay away from it.
No canceling you.
No, I don't want to.
That's interesting feedback. Have you ever gotten other feedback that just kind of surprised you one way or another?
Not really.
No.
I've never had anybody, no, I've never had any negative feedback like that. The only feedback that I've ever really gotten that could be, I guess, conceivably negative would be sometimes when we do the network and we go for cigars and we'll go to a cigar bar and we'll take a picture and post it, and they're all men. And then, well, where are the women? How come there are no women coming to the, that?
They're invited. I can testify to it.
I don't invite them. No, I don't invite them.
But not only that, I think men need men's spaces. Women need women's spaces. And then there's the blending too. Yeah. Those are things that I just think are crazy in society, personally.
Well, a lot of that's generational. Yeah. I know when I was young, the men stayed with the men and the women stayed with the women. When the men and the women got together, it wasn't to chat. It was different. It was a different time. Even the holidays, played cards. The men would play cards, and the women would talk about whatever they spoke about. But if you sat with the women, nobody said anything, but you were kind of looked down upon because you're sitting with the women. Then what are you, a girl? Said it was very different. And the opposite would be true too. A woman put herself with the men. What are you doing with all the men?
Right.
So it was just a whole different time, in society, which is probably hard to understand for people today because everything is all, it's all together. Everybody is one. Everybody is the same.
Yeah. Well, it's all together, but that's a whole other topic because I don't think that's working out quite either.
No, that may hurt you.
That's having its own. I've already gotten canceled a couple of times. What's another one?
Yeah.
But no, I don't know. That's a whole other topic.
Well,
That's another
that's
topic for
true.
you to tackle in one of your books.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of my characters are older.
Yes.
You know, and it's I guess it's somewhat more understandable to the reader, some of their positions and how they think. You know, a lot of the men are protective of especially of the women or their children, and in some respects they're gentlemanly. They'll hold a chair, they'll give up a seat. You know, I mean that's the way they are, and that's. I don't know how common that is today. You know, I mean, as old as I am, I still get up and give people seats. There are plenty of young guys standing around that doesn't even occur to them to give somebody a seat. You know, on a train. But that's times change.
Who do you read when you read?
I don't. I read the newspaper. I really don't.
Plenty of ideas in there.
You know. I'd like to say comic books, but I don't want to. But I you know what? I read Ring magazine.
The boxing
old
magazine.
Boxing magazine. Yeah, I don't read anything that's too tedious. You know, I don't sit up for hours. Reading. You know, I'll read the newspaper and that's it.
Did you have favorite TV characters that inspired you?
No, not really.
You mentioned Sherlock Holmes earlier.
Well, no, when I was younger, I read everything. No, that I did. I mean, I read Sherlock Holmes. I read Charlie Chan and Sam Spade and, James Cain and all of those.
So you always like the mystery genre?
Oh, yeah, I read them all. But I also read all the classics. I never read any classics until I was 23 or 24 years old. And I decided that maybe it was time, to start reading classics. I think I started with Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then I went through to Dracula by Bram Stoker. And
that was good too.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I got through all the famous monsters. Once I got through those biographies, let me try The Informer. And I started on, Liam O'Flaherty's The Informer. And I started reading all these different books. And they were classics, and I enjoyed them. So I kept reading them.
Do you get involved with book clubs or anything like that to share your books? Or?
No, just the lunches.
Just the lunches.
I try to share the books at the lunches. I encourage people that we do encourage them to write. Try to, guide people who need some guidance, And that's it. Try to promote the books a little bit. I handed out your book a couple of lunches back.
I know, and I wasn't there.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
What do you think the most intriguing genre is right now? I think it's what you're focusing in on. That crime. Seems to be.
I focus on it. I focus on it because it's something I know. Or I believe I know. Now my knowledge may be somewhat dated, because let's face it, there's a lot of technology involved in today's crime fighting. But I try to stick to something I know, to write about something I know.
Would you say your books take place during a certain?
Yeah, the 90s.
The 90s.
90s. I mean, I could have started back in the 70s if I chose to, but I thought the 90s was sort of in the middle, And in the 90s, it was still beepers and cell phones, and that's where I was comfortable with that, Before that, there was no cell phones and there were no beepers. I remember going out on patrol as a young cop. We didn't even have a radio.
Really?
Yeah, they didn't have enough radios to go around. And that was the early 70s. So it was different. Not a lot of it, but sometimes you went out without a radio. It was a whole different time. It was a whole different, New York City, in those days.
Let's talk about New York City, because there's interesting history in that.
Yeah.
What have you seen evolving?
Well, what I see is terrible is what they've done to the police department. I mean, they had always been going in a direction of making the cops social workers. They're not social workers. They're cops. That's why they give them guns and spats and every other thing and mace and all these tools, because it's a violent job. The good things happen as a part of them, they're doing their job. They'll deliver a baby in a taxi cab or a train. You know, they'll save somebody's life who fell in the east side, you know, in a river or something, you know, or was about to jump off a building. I mean, those were the good things, you know, that the cops did. But that was part of the work. But they were never taken to be stooges. You know, that was never. I mean, you know, they were pillars of strength.
Right.
You know, people who were up against it went to them for strength.
Exactly.
People who were being victimized went to them for the muscle. You know, and a cop had a lot of authority. You know, when I was a young cop. I mean, you know, one cop. I remember I went into a bar one time. I emptied out 10 guys myself. You know, I didn't need help. Was I the toughest guy? No, but they knew if I got on that radio.
You had the authority.
That's right.
That you could call other people.
I have
if they
a ton
didn't
of people
get the
down
message.
here. We clean up the whole place. You know, it was a whole different thing. It was a respect. You know, and now that was sort of a learning thing for me too. I went on the police department when I was 21. I realized that, you know, where you get respect. Yeah, you get respect from good deeds and doing the right thing. But when you're dealing with a general element that aren't nice people sometimes, you know, money is what gets you respect. If you paid a lot of money, people will respect that because you're making more money than them. The other thing that they get respect is fear. If they're afraid of you, you get and the image of the police department in those days was, yeah, they were there to help you.
Yeah.
But you also feared them a little bit. You know,
you didn't want to get pulled over.
That's exactly right. You know, and that was sort of a forced respect. And let's face it, you're not running for mayor. You know, you're doing a job where you're telling people no. You know, everything's fine when you tell people yes, but when you start telling them no,
that's a good way to describe it.
now you have problems. You know, you're going to have resistance. Now, there was a limitation to that resistance years ago. There is no resistance to that. I mean, I see, you know, the police officers, people going up in their face.
It's unbelievable.
Nose to nose and shouting at them. And they're taking it.
See, I would call that an immediate arrest. You know?
Yeah.
I really don't understand that. I mean, I've said to our kids, you just better...
It's preposterous.
Shut up if you ever get pulled over.
And you have
just be quiet and listen.
Yeah, and you have a leadership. Unfortunately, you got a leadership that fosters this.
Yeah.
They instead of saying, you know, let anybody that get that, what are you going to wait till they blind you or do something to hurt you? I mean, I saw a video a couple of years ago. The guy took a bucket of water and put it over the cop's head. A bucket of water, and the cop just walked away, took it. I said, now, personally, he shouldn't be a cop.
Right.
He hasn't got the backbone to be a cop. I mean, if somebody put a bucket over my head, you know, not for anything, job or no job, they can kiss the job away. I'm not going to let them get away with that. Right. You know, but it's a different type, you know, and I think a lot of that has to do with the lack of military experience that we used to have, because most of the guys were in the service, and it was sort of a macho kind of a thing. You know, it was a macho job, and there was no. You couldn't really complain too much because they would, you know, it was frowned upon. You know, your ego wouldn't let you do that. That all changed. Just somehow that whole dynamic changed. They modified the requirements. You know. Anyway, I don't mean to go off on a tangent.
No, it's very interesting because, hey, if somebody was starting to write a fictionalized crime book today, it's going to be in a different kind of backdrop than what your books were written under. And it is different.
Yeah, it's very different. It's a very, very different time, you know.
I mean, and I have a lot of respect for cops. I couldn't put on that uniform because I'd be scared the minute I put it on. You know, so if you're wearing a uniform and you're not getting, if society has broken down the respect, not society, I think it's politics, you know, has broken down the respect for that uniform, then that puts the person in it at risk.
That's true.
And that should not be. There's something wrong with that system,
You know, the interesting part, and I've thought about this, the interesting part of a lot of this is actually quite understandable, the progression of it. You know, because going back, and I'll go back to when I started, all of the people in charge of running things, they were all World War II people. They were all blood and guts, you know, whether they were school teachers or professors or construction workers or Con Ed men, whatever. They were all in the service. The war was on, you know, most of the men went, you know. And that kind of, they came back with a certain understanding of each other. They were on a certain page together, you know, they all agreed on certain things. The guy who beat up his wife was a bum. You know, everybody knew that. The guy who didn't work was a bum. Everybody agreed that. You know, there was a common line. You know, there was a common denominator that people shared, and that carried through. And also what carried through was a decisiveness. There was a no-nonsense approach. There was no babying. You know, and you did what you had to do, you know, and that was it. And there was no flexibility with right and wrong. You're wrong, you're going to pay the price. And that was it. And that was the culture. That's the way it was. Well, when they did away with the draft, that common denominator got erased. Because now very few people were in the service in comparison to the general population.
Very interesting tie-in.
So now we've softened up. You know, a guy who would, the General Patton, they would put him in a padded cell today. You know, we've softened up, and that's up and down from the mayor, and not the mayor, but from the
straight across. I understand.
Top guy on down. We've taken a very, very soft approach to crime. We make excuses for bad behavior because we don't want to offend anybody, you know. And this would have been addressed, you know, generations ago, but it's no longer now because we've been conditioned not to address these things. We've been conditioned to, you know, play nice in the sandbox on everything. And so it kind of makes sense how we got here. You know, what is difficult is how do we get out of here?
And we do need to get out of it.
Oh yeah, we
have to go back to a certain amount of consequences culture.
Oh,
you know,
I think
there's a lot you learn, you know, when you know if you say to a kid in a playground, you know, to me it gets back to playgrounds, which are so censored now and supervised. You know, if you said to some kid something stupid, you were going to get smacked in the head. You know, you know, kids learn now. It goes from 0 to 60 because I don't think there's been enough.
That's right.
Of other kind of integration or something.
That's right. Well, I think there's been a big slowdown in the ability of people to communicate. When you played in the street, you learned a lot of bad things. I mean, you know, you smartened up in a lot of ways that maybe your parents didn't want you to know about. You know, but you learned those ways. And you learned people. You knew how to talk to people. And you knew quickly when you're speaking too much or when you're being a little too rude. You know, that was a gimme. We had nothing in our home to keep us busy. There was no computer. There was no computer in the house. To, you know, go to your room was a punishment. Go to your room today, forget it. So you can't get them out of the room. You know, so the communication ability that came naturally as a youth growing up, that's gone.
If you think about it, just walking up to someone's house and knocking on the door and saying, you know, hi, Mrs. Celano, can, you know, Anthony come out and play? You know, you had to like get your guts going to go knock on the door because you didn't know if the mom was going to answer or the dad was going to answer.
That's right. And you had to be able to think on your feet if you were a little off base when you were playing outside, you know, when you were confronted by one of these adults. You know, it was just different. You learned how to communicate at many different levels, which I think that's gone today. You know, when my kids were young, they were about 15 or 16. That's when they started with the computers, really, the phones. And I remember we were in New Jersey driving someplace, and I couldn't get them off trying to have a conversation. I couldn't get them off that thing. You know, what'd you say? You know, because they were locked into this. I said, I'm going to show you something. I says, I want you to pick out somebody old on the street. just pick out somebody old for me. I want to ask him for directions. I knew where I was going, but I wanted to ask for directions. And so they directed me to an older man. I pulled over. I told him where I wanted to go. He gave me directions in 3 seconds. I said, thank you very much. And I went on. And I said, now I want you to pick out a kid. Pick out a kid around your age, old enough that he should know how to direct me someplace. And they did. And I pulled over and I asked the kid for the same directions. You move... you need to go. He couldn't get the words out. Now, if I'd have asked him for those directions electronically, he'd have banged them out for me. But he couldn't. He wasn't comfortable in verbalizing or talking to a stranger who was asking him for directions. And that's, I think, is bad. I don't think that's. I think that's a problem, particularly in a business perspective.
Exactly.
I mean, I know when I had the business, I didn't make many mistakes, but whenever I did, thank God I was able to articulate, face to face what had gone wrong, what the glitch was, and how we're going to fix it. You can't do that electronically. You can't do that on that. That's okay when everything's good in the fair weather. But when something goes wrong, you better be able to talk because, it's the only way you can salvage a client relationship.
Exactly. Well, this has been such an interesting talk, and unfortunately, the clock is telling me we're out of time, and the time went too fast because this is a whole other discussion we could be having.
I know, we sort of went off.
But it was good.
On track, yeah.
Because it all leads to communication and telling stories and, learning to speak and learning to observe and learning to translate what you've observed into words, whether they're in a conversation or in storytelling.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Anthony Celano.
Well, thank
Tony
you.
to some.
Yeah.
It's such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Everybody, this has been the Silver Disobedience Podcast. I'm Dian Griesel, your host, and we are recording in iconic Manhattan Center on West 34th Street in New York City, which I highly recommend you check out the link to Manhattan Center. But also below, there are going to be all kinds of links to Anthony Celano's author page. You're going to want to check out his books. They are great. And hey, if you're a movie producer, I highly recommend you check them out too, because they would make great films. They're great stories from start to finish, and you could have a full series of them because the characters evolve. So whoever's producing Mission Impossible, you might want to check out some Anthony Celano books. Just saying. Thanks very much, Anthony.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Hit subscribe.